Filming yourself at gigs, we're stuck on the first line, jeez. Filming yourself at gigs is tricky. It adds a lot of complexity and setup. It might be gear that you're not that familiar with, and there are a ton of things that can go wrong. Fortunately for you, I've made all the mistakes so that you don't have to. Now, I don't intend this to be the most comprehensive video on the subject. I'm very much like a run and gun type of guy, trying to get the best results for the least amount of effort. But if you're just looking to get started on filming yourself at gigs, I'm hoping that this will be a good starting point to show you what kind of gear you might need, what the commitment will be, and then just a few of the basics to get you started. So with that in mind, let's start talking about the most important part of this whole process, and that's audio. Because audio is way more important than your video. And if you disagree with me, I want you to go watch a Vulfpeck video and then come back. Now, the absolute best quality audio you can get is to record multitracks, and some modern professional mixers are able to just send multitracks over USB. So if you've got a laptop with a DAW on it, like Logic or Pro Tools or whatever, you should be able to get multitracks from the mixer. However, this is not always the simplest or most feasible option. Like if you've got Todd over here who slings a mean whiskey and Coke and also knows how to turn the PA on, you're probably not getting multitracks. Which is why I'm most often using this Zoom H4n field recorder that I bought used a couple years ago for like less than $100. And you can get a better version of this, but these kinds of things work great. It was how I was able to get this recording. Now, there are a couple of ways to use something like this, but in the clip that I showed you, I'm using both the microphones to capture just the on-stage audio, and then I'm also getting a direct bass signal through these XLR inputs. I'm just running a cable directly from my pedal board into this so that I can show you the isolated bass, or even just like turn the bass up in the mix, because most of the time, like, the bass is the hardest thing to capture. So getting the microphones on this to do what you want is going to require a little bit of trial and error depending on where you put it in the room, what you're pointing it at, how loud things are. So you're going to have to really watch the gain or recording level on here, because if you get it too loud, then everything's going to be distorted and clipping and unusable. And if you get it too quiet, then it's going to be hard to hear. But when in doubt, err on the side of being a little bit too quiet. You can usually work with that in post-production way easier than you can if the audio is clipping and distorted. So like I said, most of the time I have this up on stage with me so that I can start and stop the recording when I want, or monitor it for if it's too loud or too quiet so I can adjust things. But you can also put this up at front of house if you want to just capture the sound out of the mains instead of what's on your monitor. But if you're going to do that, you're probably not going to be close enough to get a direct signal from your instrument, but I would still recommend using these. Ask your sound engineer if you can get the mains mix or like the front of house mix. And so everything that's coming out of those speakers will go directly into this input, and it will sound like this. So that sounds really nice and clean, but it's also really dry. But luckily, we've also recorded the sound of the room from these microphones, so we can bring in like the crowd noise and just like the bigness of the stage. You combine those together in post-production, and then it sounds like this. Ultimately, it's going to be up to you to experiment a little bit, see what works for you. I guarantee, though, that something like this is going to be much, much better quality audio than like any camera microphone that you could use. And actually, let's segue into cameras now. I've used a bunch of different cameras to record gigs, including GoPros, nicer cameras, but you're probably wondering, can you just use your phone? Survey says... yes, yes, you can use your phone. In fact, modern cell phone cameras have gotten quite good, and I highly recommend just using whatever you have, even if it's not the nicest or best. Just try it out, because again, the quality of your image is less important than your audio. So if you're gonna spend money on anything, get this. Don't get something like this. What I like about filming with my phone is that the automatic settings do a good job of keeping everything in focus, dealing with changing conditions, and just generally working without having to think too much about it. You can generally just set this to its highest quality and then hit record and call it a day, and it'll do just fine. Usually. I just use the stock video app. This is an iPhone 15 Pro. I set it to 4K, and that's pretty much it. Just make sure that you're using this camera and not this camera. This camera bad, this camera good. Now I know it's tempting to use this camera because it lets you see what you're filming, but I promise that if you just like get a tripod, set up your camera, like use your friend to like set up your shot, make sure that everything's going to be in it, and then record, you'll get far, far better results out of this one than you would with this one. It's worth it, I promise. So there are a lot of pros to just using your phone, but there are a couple of cons. The biggest two that I can think of are storage space and battery life. A lot of people don't really opt for a ton of storage on things because everything ends up in the cloud, but just bear in mind that just 3 minutes of 4K footage is a full gig. So if you're going to record an entire performance, like 45 to 60 minutes, you're going to eat up 20 gigs of space with just that one video. So make sure that you've got plenty of recording room there, and also have your battery fully charged before you start, because who wants to be left without a phone? I don't need it. Battery life is a little bit less of a concern. You just need to make sure that you're charged up or you have an external battery before you start recording. Otherwise, it'll stop before you're done. Should I have to say that? But while using your phone is great, the camera that I actually use the most often is a GoPro. This one is a Hero 10, but anything like 7 or 8 and newer are all really great cameras. What I really like about using these cameras is just how small they are, and they have a ton of options for mounting. This is my favorite one right here, by the way, this magnetic clamp mount. You've got these jaws on it that'll open up wide enough that you can stick it on a headstock or a mic stand. The magnetic bit on the back will mount to just about anything. I've put this up on the ceiling or on like a monitor grill. Like, there's just lots of options to get to some really interesting angles with these things because they are so small. They also have this mount, so you can get some like cool POV stuff if you've got like a really rambunctious crowd or some on-stage antics that you can get some really neat angles with. Now, I've used these both to capture like a wide angle of the entire band or have it like really up close just on me because I'm really vain, but they work great for both of those kinds of filming. However, the GoPro is not without shortcomings too. Because of its small size, it has a small sensor, and a small sensor means that it doesn't have the greatest low light performance, which is like the majority of my filming situations. Getting it dialed in just right requires just a little bit of knowledge of how cameras work. It's not like super user-friendly as far as just like hitting a button and recording things like you would with your phone. By the way, these are the settings that I use on my GoPro. You can copy those if you want. There they are. Another thing that I've heard people complain about on these is battery life being really bad, but I haven't really experienced that. Just one battery will typically get me through an entire set, so like 45 to 60 minutes, and then you just swap them out for breaks. Like, I have 3 batteries, and that's been more than enough for absolutely everything I've ever done. The more that I use this camera, the more I'm finding that I film less because I'm trying to get specific clips that I want to share. Right, like if I just know like, oh, this one specific transition here is really cool and I want to have that, or like there's one cool bass part that I just want to get a clip of to share, and then that actually pays out when you get into the editing process because you have way less footage to go through. But before we get to post-production, we should talk about these for a second. When we talk about nicer cameras, we're usually talking about DSLR or mirrorless cameras. This one happens to be the latter. It is a Canon M50. You'll see these recommended a lot in like people who are starting YouTube channels because they take really, really good images, and they are fairly affordable, and they can do this one neat trick, which is removing lenses so that you can put a different one on. Nice! The kit lens that comes with this camera is really, really bad for low light, but being able to slap on a faster lens like this Canon 22mm lens or this Sigma 56mm lens make a world of difference in your image quality in low light situations. Just for comparison's sake, if you wanted to know the numbers, this is an f1.6 lens, this is an f2 lens, the GoPro is f2.8, and the kit lens that this comes with is f3.5, so it's like way worse. Don't worry if none of those numbers make sense to you. Lower number, better low light performance, that's really all you need to know for this scenario. Bottom line is that there's a whole world of lenses that you can explore here, and that's the kind of flexibility and versatility you get with a camera like this. However, this also comes with the most downsides. If you're not prepared to really dig into how the camera works, understand how all the settings function, and spend somewhere between $600 and $1,000, this is not the camera for you. These things tend to also be a little bit bulky and potentially really fragile, and you can compare that to the GoPro here, which despite this having the absolute smallest lens I can put on it, is quite a lot bigger. There's also one really, really big problem with cameras like this that are like photography cameras that also happen to do video, because due to this really stupid tax law, these max out at a 30-minute record time. So if you're in a situation where you have to hit record and then walk away for the rest of your set, this will just stop at 30 minutes. But Andrew, what about the app that lets you remotely control the camera? Oh, you mean this one that's so janky and bad that barely ever works and I would never ever rely on in any situation? Yeah, these apps suck. I've never gotten this to work very well, and it's just a point of frustration for me. It does transfer photos okay, but the remote shooting capabilities are like 2010 level. I don't know why these are so far behind. And I know that they can be done well because the GoPro one, I use this one all the time. This app actually works. I'm so confident in this that I've actually put my GoPro up on the ceiling or like attached it to lighting rigs and then put that up in the air, and then you can still control it from your phone. GoPro has it figured out. Like, they have a lot of flaws, but their app and their camera work really reliably, and Canon's app does not. And I've heard the same thing for like Fujifilm and Nikon and Sony and whoever else makes cameras. They also have really ass-backwards apps that don't work. Anyway, all of that is to say that I just really like using the GoPro because it is just really easy to use and easy to carry. And for like just filming for self-critique, you can just set this up somewhere close by, hit record, and the internal microphone, while it's not great, it picks up bass well enough so that you can review your performance. I think if you were sharing stuff online, like if you were specifically capturing for that, you'd do a better job with your audio. But for just like critiquing myself, this works great. And occasionally I get stuff out of it that is worth sharing. So one last thing on cameras. Everything I've shown up to this point has basically been on a tripod or in a fixed position otherwise. I recently started shooting other bands, and what I found is that when I'm running the handheld camera, not only can I use the nice camera, but the videos are just so much more interesting for all of the camera movement that comes with that. So if at all possible, when you shoot these gigs, like, put them out on a tripod if you have to, but if you can get like your significant other or your roommate to come and like run your camera, it makes a world of difference for how interesting your video looks. And actually, if you happen to live anywhere within like 2 hours of Salt Lake, hire me. I'll come do it. I will come and make you a great video of your band, and it'll look amazing because I know how to do this stuff. Before we move on, let's quickly talk about camera settings in kind of a general sense. There are 3 things that I think you should just at least be aware of if you're filming yourself, and those 3 things are frame rate, ISO, and resolution. Frame rate is just the number of pictures that your camera takes per second, and generally you want to just stick to 30 frames per second. If you go to higher frame rates like 60 or 120, you will end up with videos that have less motion blur. They look a little bit smoother, so if you've got a lot of action, that's a good option. But for the best low light performance, which is going to be the vast majority of what we're filming in if you're filming gigs, you're going to want to stick to lower frame rates because you'll get the best low light performance. Second thing is ISO, and you can basically just think of this like a gain knob. Turning up the gain will make your image brighter, but it will also introduce noise in the form of grain. It's basically just like turning gain up on like a distortion pedal. Everything becomes louder but noisier. The basic rule of thumb here is that you want to expose for the highlights, meaning that you just want the brightest parts of your image to be accounted for and to have the most detail, and if the rest of your image is a little bit dark, that's okay. That is much easier to deal with in post-production than dealing with a really noisy image. Now that said, I have seen some AI tools that can remove grain from photographs, and I'm certain that you can do the same thing for video, but just for my money, just expose for the highlights, keep things down low if you have to, and just deal with the dark image, because I promise you it's easier to edit a dark image than a noisy, dirty image. I've been told by better videographers than me that a maximum of 400 ISO on a GoPro is the way to go, and I've been pretty happy with the low light performance I've gotten with that tip, so I am going to share that with you because it helped me, and now we're all happy. But higher end cameras can have a much, much higher ISO without having to deal with noise. If you're using your phone or a GoPro though, they'll keep it low. Last thing I want to talk about is resolution. A lot of people come to me and insist that we film in 4K, and yes, it's technically higher quality, but it's not always necessary or the best decision to make. If you aren't planning on doing much editing later, then having this big 4K image is maybe not necessary because you know everybody's going to be watching videos on their phone, and on a screen this small, 1080 is just fine. Filming at 4K results in much, much bigger file sizes. It's about 4 times bigger than 1080, and that can put an additional strain on your computer when you go to edit too. That said, I do like filming with 4K on a camera like this, especially if I'm getting like a wide shot of the whole band, because what that means is that if one person does something interesting and you want to like punch in on that person, you can do it, and that works, and you can move the frame around within the canvas there and not lose resolution. Ultimately though, you are getting 1080 out of it, which is kind of the goal anyway. So if you're not planning on doing that, like punching into the image at all, like just frame up your shot the way it's supposed to, and then you can just film in 1080 and not have to deal with bigger file sizes and more editing strain. Because remember, at the end of the day, 90% of people are going to be watching on a screen this size. So maybe you don't need 4K. Just keep that in mind.
And if God was there, he let me dream on still.
Okay, we finally got to the point where we can talk about post-production, and I'm going to make this super quick because this video is already so mega long. So as we get to the end here, let's talk about my editor. This is DaVinci Resolve, and it is compatible with both Mac and Windows. It'll let you edit in horizontal or vertical formats. It's got all of the editing tools you could ever need, and it is my favorite price to pay for anything. Free. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to use this step by step. I'm going to leave that to Casey Ferris. I'm going to leave his video and the little thing up here and in the description down below. Go check out his crash course. It'll get you up and running in just a couple hours, and it is a really fantastic tutorial. If you want to go beyond that, Mr. Alex Tech is another creator whose videos that I've learned a lot from. So those two guys will teach you everything you could ever know about DaVinci Resolve, way better than I ever could, all right? In a nutshell, what you can do here is drag your video in, drag your audio in, select them both, right-click, and then you can go to auto-align clips based on waveform. DaVinci Resolve will look through it, figure out where it matches, and do all the work for you. And then from there, you can do anything you want with it. Chop up your footage, cut to other angles, EQ and compress your audio, export it for YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or wherever you happen to put your videos, and you're basically done. There you go. You did it. Woohoo! Now, I know I've left out a ton of details. I couldn't cover everything in this video, but if you have any questions, please do leave me a comment down below. I'll do my best to answer them, or at least point you in the right direction to get your answer. And beyond that, I think that's it for me. I'll see you on the next one. ANP out!